Hello, thanks for being in a new video. This time I have full review of the Motorola Edge 50 Neo. Let's get started. This is one of the best devices in its range. In Mexico, it has had an introductory price of 8,999 pesos. That is approximately $450. Although remember that the prices here are not the same as over there. However, I think it puts it to compete in a very good way because in this price range there is a lot of competition. However, I think it has enough to be able to distinguish itself from the rest. For starters, if you buy it from Motorola's online store and possibly some other retailers, you get the Motorola Moto Buds Plus as a free gift. They are the fully wireless earbuds, and in the box also comes a case that is nice, not a clear case that will turn yellow in the future. They also include U-Charger. So it's a really highly recommended and smart buy, but let's get to know it point by point because as I tell you, this is a price range where there are several competitors. I think the main one will be the Galaxy A55, but there are also some other exponents that could get to compete in a good way depending on what kind of user you are. So let's describe it point by point. This is a relatively compact device that makes very good use of the front. If you notice, it has very narrow bezels, so the screen is considerably wide, but the device also remarkably compact. Here on the front, we're going to find Gorilla Glass protection. However, it appears to be Gorilla Glass 3. So although it does integrate some level of protection, the truth is that today Gorilla Glass 3 is perceived as a bit outdated, especially in this price range. Possibly this is one of its few weak points since in the price range you will find other devices with a higher level of resistance in the glass. On the right side we will find volume buttons and on or off button plus a microphone that will help with noise cancellation issues. On the top there is another microphone while the left side is completely clean. This device, by the way, has a thickness of 8.09 millimeters and weighs no more than 170.2 grams. I insist, it is very compact and also very light. At the bottom, we will find the tray where, by the way, we will only be able to place a nano SIM card. There will also be another microphone plus the USB-C port and finally the speaker with 3 perforations and a legal indicator that I personally do not like how it looks because it spoils the design a bit. In the back, we will find a synthetic leather cover very pleasant to the touch. In this case, I have the Poinciana color edition. You know that these colors are selected with Pantone. I would call it orange. There are also other colors with nice names that its traditional name could be gray, brown, and blue. There is a nice palette of colors to choose from. At the bottom, they have the Pantone stamp. They are actually very vibrant colors, very nice. The contour of the cameras also comes customized with a ring with metallic aesthetics and with a small relief that is rising to reach the area of the camera module. Overall, it is a very nice design, but it is not only beautiful but also resistant except for the screen, since in this case it will offer us the IP68 level of resistance against water and dust, so it could even be submerged and will resist. In fact, it also has military level protection, meaning that it is going to work even in extreme temperatures, both high and low. So it's a device that can definitely compete very well in design. The screen is another very strong aspect of this device. As I anticipated, it's not too big, but it's wide enough for comfortable use. Its diagonal is 6.36 inches and offers us a resolution of 1200 by 2670 pixels. That is slightly higher than Full HD, so it is already offering us a little more than the average device today. So with this resolution, it reaches a density of 460 pixels per inch. This translates into very sharp texts, even if the letters are relatively small or thin. Everything looks very good. It is difficult to notice the pixels, and in this case we are talking about a POLED panel, which will offer us intense colors, very high contrast, and a very good level of brightness. In fact, its peak is 3000 nits. This peak will be reached when you are going to visualize HDR content, since it is also compatible with this type of technologies, so you can have very realistic visualization of certain content. So it's a very good screen wherever you want to watch it. The maximum brightness is comfortable comfortable for outdoor use. The minimum brightness is also relatively comfortable, although you do need to turn on the extra dimming options in the accessibility options if you want to have an even more comfortable view at night. But as I say, fortunately it does have all of these options. So it's a display that I also liked, and we can consider it as a strong point. The device offers 3 calibration modes for the screen. One where you can have the colors as saturated as possible, one that will be radiant colors, and one that will be natural colors, each with its own level of intensity, and also has a manual adjustment of the color temperature of the screen. Although I would like to see an automatic adjustment of this section, but that is unusual in this range. In sound, we find good news because stereo sound is integrated. That's a good thing, but also has a sound that I consider to be of good quality. It is not going to be the loudest, nor is it going to be the one with the highest presence of bass frequencies of all current devices, but I think that in its range it stands up well. The presence of bass frequencies is high enough to be able to distinguish it, and the sound does not become annoying at any time. Let's listen to a small test, but remember that it is not the same to listen to it live. In addition, through software, it brings good options. This always from the hand of Dolby Atmos, with whom Motorola has a very good relationship. So we are going to find different sound presets, even spatial audio functions or intelligent audio with different profiles, and access to a 10-band equalizer where you can customize specifically how you want this device to sound without the need to have headphones connected. So we're going to find some very positive things here, as well as some presets. Definitely, the experience so far is going to be very good, but it doesn't have a headphone jack. That's something that maybe a lot of people will still find a bit annoying, but if you consider that you're getting wireless headphones, I think you can forgive that annoyance. In addition, it supports high-resolution codecs for compatible wireless headphones such as LDAC, LHDC, both version 3 and version 4, and aptX. So basically, any pair of headphones you buy that integrate high-resolution audio is going to be compatible with this cell phone. It also integrates 3 microphones, one of which is focused on noise cancellation, which comes in handy at certain times. Let's do a test.
Este es un audio grabado utilizando los micrófonos del Motorola Edge 50 Neo.
I find that the audio is a bit brighter than we would like. It seems like the treble gets to stand out too much when it's picking up vocals. But now, let's listen to a test of this device in a much noisier environment.
We've also
I think it's pretty clear that this will be another of its weaknesses, as it puts a lot of priority on noise cancellation, and there's no way to turn that option off. So if you're at some concert, it's going to try to eliminate the noise, quote unquote, and it's going to leave the singer simply with a very distorted voice. So this is definitely something that Motorola should fix, because it's happening on the vast majority of their devices. There is an urgent update they need to send out, but it seems like they haven't noticed. To end this sound and vibration thing, fortunately it integrates a vibration motor on the x-axis. That is, it's going to give you much more premium feedback. It's not as simple a vibration as mid-range or low-end devices, but it does feel like a little thump in your hand. It's something you obviously have to perceive when you're using it, and it's hard to convey this communication to you through a video, but you have to be sure that the vibration engine is of good quality. The front camera is 32 megapixels with f2.4 aperture and fixed focus. It doesn't seem to be as attractive in terms of its aperture, but the resolution will allow pixels to be merged for better lighting. Remember that you can rotate the device for quick access to the camera. In fact, you can also rotate between the front and rear camera by doing exactly the same gesture. The device offers you 2 levels of zoom. As you can see, the capture is not as snappy in this aspect and will offer us 2 color modes, one that is natural and one that will make the colors a bit more saturated. By default, in all tests, we use the natural setting. Also note that it includes a beauty mode with different settings, so you can modify pretty much anything you want on your face. We are also going to find a button where we can preview in real time several color filters. And in the settings, we can also activate the capture with the palm of the hand, even also the capture by smiles, or tap anywhere on the screen to make it work as a shutter. So yes, you can take pictures in a comfortable way. The selfie results are going to be really very good. I like the good level of detail this camera gets, although the colors are perhaps a bit too saturated. The device offers 2 levels of zoom. The closer one is going to help you get even more detail in the face, so it can definitely be a good choice. And note that even with the arm outstretched, we're still going to see good focus on the face, so in these types of scenes it doesn't affect the fact that it doesn't have autofocus as much. Although there will be some areas of the picture that will show up with a little bit of chromatic aberration, so it's not the most advanced front-facing camera you've ever seen, but I think overall it's fine. If you're too close to the camera, it's not going to be able to focus on you as it has fixed focus. In indoor scenes, we see very similar results, i.e., it still gets a good level of detail. Again, the colors are slightly more saturated than usual, but overall the picture is good because of the good handling of noise in the darker areas. In backlit scenarios, I am surprised that from the preview we see a good balance of light and shadow, and the result is even better, balancing well without noticing overexposed areas in the brightest part or too dark in the shadows. The truth is that the result has been very good, so it could be a strong point considering that the preview is optimized. At night, we will still find this detail of excessive saturation. In fact, in this case, I think it is even more excessive. It could be corrected with an update, or you could even edit your photo to lower the saturation a bit, because it really is a bit strange. However, the quality is good. The level of detail also controls noise very well, so the only drawback I have with this camera is the saturation. Notice how in backlit night shots it will rely on the screen as a flash simulation to slightly illuminate your face, and it does it in a good way. It is not an excessive illumination, so I think the picture has a good result. If you don't use the screen as a flash simulation, you still get a good result, although not as detailed and with a bit more noise and graininess, but I think it still handles it very well while maintaining a good balance between reducing noise and maintaining the level of detail. Notice how well the night portrait shots come out. This is a rare thing. Believe me, I have tried much more expensive devices that in this same test give a very bad result, but in this case the result is very good, and in fact on the day we noticed that it does keep objects in focus in these front portrait photographs, so it is a device with a very good front camera. The only drawback is that if you are going to get to find chromatic aberration even in this type of photographs. So if they manage to handle chromatic aberration a little better, it would be practically a perfect camera for its price. On the back, we are going to find a photographic system composed of 3 cameras. The one at the top is the main camera with an approximate focal length of 24mm. It has a 50 megapixel sensor. It is the Sony Lithia 700C. That is to say, it is a modern sensor. That is why it is necessary to highlight it. It also offers us an f1.8 aperture, autofocus, and optical stabilization. At the bottom, we are going to find the ultra-wide camera with a focal length of 13mm. It's 13 megapixel sensors, it has f2.2 aperture, and it also has autofocus, so let's say it also works as a macro camera at the same time. And finally, possibly the most attractive addition, the 73mm camera that is 3x optical zoom, although it has a 10 megapixel sensor, so it's not that advanced, but in the range, very few devices could get to offer you optical zoom. In addition, it has f-aperture 2.0, so it has very good light entry, autofocus, and optical stabilization as well. Note that in this case, Again, we don't see such a snappy shutter response, and in case you hold down the shutter, it also starts a burst that doesn't look snappy. And in our test, trying to capture the number 3, we noticed that it has a time compensation, i.e., when you press the shutter, it has actually already tried to capture the picture an instant before, so you don't have to be so worried about capturing the exact moment. The burst takes almost 3/4 of a second to start, so it's a slow reacting burst, and the space between one photo and the next is relatively wide. You can tap on the screen to adjust the exposure and focus, or you can also access the Pro mode where you will find many more parameters. For example, focus, white balance, shutter speed, which can go up to 32 seconds. We will also find the ISO setting, which can go up to 3200 exposure compensation. And remember that in this case, it does allow us to take pictures in RAW or combined with JPG as well. Within the automatic mode also includes this selector to have more intense or more natural colors, and also a button to load the color filters. Fortunately, from the automatic mode, it also integrates the QR code scanner, which reacts very well, and to scan documents you need to enter a special scanner mode, which in this case will use Adobe technology. It doesn't allow you to use the ultra-wide camera, but by integrating Adobe technology, you see that it immediately detects the edges, automatically does the capture, enhances the color, brightness, and contrast, and allows you to add multiple pages to this same document, and also some other additional tools. So it's a really very good scanner. This device incorporates a high-resolution mode with which the photograph will take advantage of the full resolution of the sensor. Although I have to tell you that you don't really notice it, it looks like a photograph just stretched or with interpolated pixels that doesn't really represent the resolution. So there is not as much level of detail as we would have liked in this type of photograph. In motion scenes, the device does a good job, although note that in this case, it seems to have a sweeping orange effect, the same color as the ball, so it's not perfect. The main camera does a slightly better job, but again, some distortion is generated by the accelerated motion. So it's not an expert camera, but that's for the more strict ones. The telephoto camera notes that it will have more or less the same drawback with a little bit of distortion or a sweeping effect. So for scenes with very fast movements, it is perhaps not the best exponent. In outdoor scenes, the ultra-wide camera has a bit cooler color rendering than the situation actually was. But speaking specifically about the quality of the photography, note that we see a good result practically without so much distortion on the edges, although you might see chromatic aberration in general. So again, it's not going to be a high-end camera, but I think for the price it does very well. The main camera has much more accurate color accuracy. You notice that the warm tones of the day are represented very well. It even has good level of detail. So it's a camera that's really going to give us good quality. In fact, it also gives us a 2x zoom with cropping on the sensor. To have this practically optical quality photography, it looks good. So even in these intermediate zoom ranges, there is a good result. The 3x zoom camera again goes for a slightly cooler color rendering. So if there is one criticism, it is that it does not maintain color consistency between the three cameras. Perhaps this could be improved with an update. But outside of color, we're going to find good detail, and overall, it's a good quality photograph. Regarding the full zoom range, note that this is the ultra-wide camera, then the main camera, then 2x camera, and finally we get to the 3x optical zoom camera. But that's not the maximum zoom. But notice how we can keep zooming in and the image is still going to retain very good quality. It's definitely one of the leading zoom exponents in the mid-range. That's because it has a telephoto camera, and that's something that almost no device in the range has. So it definitely comes to stand out a lot in this aspect. In fact, we can keep increasing the zoom, but note that in this case, while it has a good optimization for well-defined text or lines, the textures are going to appear a bit strange. So long-range zoom is going to work well with well-defined text and figures, but not with textures. In fact, this is the maximum zoom, that is 30x. Honestly, it looks pretty good if you compare it to the distance from which the picture was taken. Indoors, the ultra-wide camera seems to me to perform very well because it controls noise well. Remember that in this setting, there is not as much lighting and it is a considerably clean photo while maintaining a good level of detail. The main camera is obviously going to have greater capabilities and better light gathering, so it is the one recommended for use in this type of scenario, and it also maintains a very good level of detail and a lot of cleanliness. With the 2x zoom setting, I think you do get to notice that it is digital zoom, unlike outdoors where it seemed to retain more optical quality. And when we switch to the 3x lens, again we notice that the color management is different from the other cameras. This is a warmer looking photograph, so definitely if anything Motorola can improve on this device would be to have a more uniform color between all the cameras. But again, even though it's a telephoto camera in low light indoor scenarios, the result actually looked very good to me because of the control it has over noise without eliminating the level of detail it achieves. In backlit scenarios, note that the preview doesn't look as well optimized. It seems to make a little effort, but it's not enough. The ultra-wide camera does a good job balancing highlights and shadows well. It's actually curious because I thought it was going to reveal a lot more chromatic aberration, considering that usually in these backlit scenes, chromatic aberration is usually exponentiated. But in this case, it's slight, not very noticeable if you don't zoom in to see the details. So the quality looks very good to me. Just be careful with the fingers that can appear on the edges because it is a very wide camera. The main camera performs similarly, and I even consider it a bit inferior to the ultra-wide camera in this result, as there are some areas that still look slightly overexposed. It's nothing really too serious, but I think they could improve it even more. The telephoto camera performs similarly to the main camera. There are still some slightly overexposed areas if you get really picky, but overall I think it delivers for the quality for its price. At night, I also find it does a very good job. Notice that with the ultra-wide camera we see extremely clean photography without losing too much of the textures. This surprises me because, believe me, there are other devices that can take two paths, completely remove noise but also remove a lot of detail, or keep a lot of detail but also keep a lot of noise. In this case, I think Motorola finds a very good balance, and even the brightest areas don't come out completely overexposed. Considering it's the ultra-wide camera, I think it's an excellent picture. The main camera is still going to improve on what we saw in the ultra-wide camera. Notice that the exposure of the brighter area is much better and more detailed, and it also maintains the strengths we saw with a good level of detail and excellent noise handling. With the telephoto camera, the only thing we notice again is this change in white balance and color handling, but it still maintains good exposure of the brighter areas and good lighting in the darker areas. He even notes that a scene where there is no light source can have even more light and better detail. It's a really great picture considering how dark it was at the time. With the ultra-wide camera, you can see how dark this scene could get, and yet the ultra-wide camera also does an excellent job. In fact, the main camera looks a bit artificial because of all the lighting it has, while the ultra-wide camera gives us a more realistic scene. Note that if you try to zoom in on a very dark scene, it will go for digital zoom and not optical zoom. For macro photography, the main camera does not have the ability to focus from very close to objects. You can apply some digital zoom and the result can be improving, but if you want to be as close as possible, you should know that the ultra-wide camera has autofocus, so it would also work as a macro camera, but it is not like the macro cameras of most mid-range devices that are only 2 megapixels, because in this case it uses the ultra-wide lens, so it has a much higher resolution sensor that will give you a very good level of detail. Although in this particular case I didn't like the color so much, but it's definitely appreciated that the ultra-wide camera has macro capabilities. It's something we usually see in much more expensive devices. By the way, if the ultra-wide camera doesn't seem wide enough for you, you can always use the panorama mode, and here is the result of a panoramic photograph. It has a good level of detail, although I wouldn't consider it to be ultra high resolution, but it definitely comes out well, even balancing highlights and shadows well, which is something where other devices can struggle in their panoramic photography. And with respect to portraits, it notes that unfortunately it was not able to keep objects in focus well. I think that is something where it fails, and yes, it should improve a lot, since the vast majority of devices take portrait photos with greater accuracy in detection using the rear camera. What I like about Motorola is that it allows you to use different focal lengths. Take for example my face, because that's where you'll notice the most difference in the following pictures. This one, for example, is using a focal length of 35 millimeters. That is a little bit of zoom, but giving a much more natural touch of portrait photography. In fact, I love the bokeh effect it creates in the background, but again, the objects don't seem to be detected as accurately, and that does get annoying. Note that you can also shoot with 50 millimeters, and again, it seems to be a much more professional photograph with a telephoto perspective. Nice background blur, but it still has the same problem of incorrect object detection, and the farthest you can get is 85 millimeters using the telephoto camera. In fact, it will be more advisable for you to take portraits with that camera, as besides having a much more natural perspective for portraits, it seems that this camera doesn't struggle as much with object detection. So the result is very good. Notice the difference between this 85mm portrait and the first portrait that did not have telephoto. The telephoto perspective definitely helps a lot, but hopefully with an upgrade they will improve the object detection. In fact, note that at night I did other portrait tests, and again it was not able to keep objects in focus. Although again, note the evolution of how the photo quality improves as you use a telephoto lens. So the portraits in terms of perspective are very good but bad in terms of object detection. So this is one of the few weak points that this device has. For video recording, it's going to support 4K at 30 frames per second with all cameras. Although to do dynamic switching between cameras, you will need to record in full HD. Also, note that if you want to record at 60 frames per second, it will disable the ultra-wide camera, and while it does let you zoom in, it won't actually switch to the telephoto camera. So you are a bit limited if you want to record at 60 frames per second. Also note that in this case, we're not going to find a professional video recording mode or anything similar. When recording, note that you can pause and resume your recording. You can also take pictures while recording and also turn on the flashlight without the need to cut your video recording. There is also a relatively convenient ring for manipulating the zoom. There is good news and bad news. The ultra-wide camera records in 4K. That's excellent news, although the color isn't quite as good. Colors are a bit more saturated or intense than they should be, but that wouldn't be my main complaint. My main complaint is that you have to stop recording to switch to the main camera, as it only lets you have a very limited zoom. The main camera is going to record with much better quality, more accurate colors. Although the white balance can also at times change a little bit abruptly, but overall it's a better quality recording, and it's also obviously in 4K. So I like that, but to switch to the telephoto camera, you're also going to need to stop the video recording, because even though it lets you zoom in, it's still really digital zoom. So once you stop and start again from the 3x camera, you can get a very good quality level of detail. Although again, you're going to find that the white balance can be a little bit unstable. At times it becomes very cool colors, at times it can become very warm colors. So I would say that video recording does need improvement, specifically in the automatic white balance. But indoors, there is going to be more noise present, unlike in photography where I controlled it very well. In this case, it's much more noticeable. Fortunately, it holds colors well. Switching to the main camera, noise is going to be slightly better controlled, although it is still noticeable. But what is most noticeable is the level of detail still maintaining good color saturation. Finally, the telephoto camera is going to suffer a lot in these low-light video recording scenarios. This at the same time makes me surprised by the good result we saw in photography, but in video it falls very short. When recording backlit video with the ultra-wide camera, we are going to see some strange colors. We are also going to see that it is not able to balance highlights and shadows very well. There are some overexposed areas in the back. It's not a disaster, but it will definitely be better to record with the main camera, where we're going to find a better balance of highlights and shadows. Although curiously, the shadow area has a lot of noise, so I would definitely not recommend you to record backlit with this device. And if you use the telephoto camera, note that it's going to have a similar behavior to what we had already seen. Slightly overexposed areas in the background, even the focus can get a little bit choppy at times, so it is not a good exponent in backlight. At night, we continue under the same theme: noise present, unstable white balance, and in this case specifically with little light input. Since we are using the ultra-wide camera, you can get to notice it more in the even darker areas where there is no light present. The main camera improves a bit, but it is still not as attractive when there is light present. In darker areas, it does manage to recover a good amount of light, but there is also quite a bit of noise present. Confirming that while in photography the result had surprised us a lot, in videos it is again noted that we are in front of a device still in the mid-range. And with the telephoto camera, it will be again what we expected. It has many complications even to focus when there is little light, and the result can look very dark. The stabilization with the ultra-wide camera is very good. When we are walking, there's practically no compensation movements, and when we are running, it also makes a good balance. Perhaps the focus can get a little confused, but I think action scenes come out well with this device. With the main camera, we will also find a good stabilization. Even when running, we can see a good result. And with the telephoto camera, we also find a good stabilization. Although in this specific clip, it is very noticeable that it goes at a low bit rate per second, which causes that at some points there are areas of the video that look pixelated, which is bad, but the stabilization specifically is very good. It also integrates a super stable mode, although curiously the focus got completely out of control, exposure as well. So I think this mode needs to be corrected with an update urgently. As I anticipated, the zoom range is very limited. The ultra-wide camera lets you zoom up to 0.9x. The main camera lets you zoom in further, but it doesn't switch to the telephoto camera, so the result looks very poorly detailed. Recording in 4K with the 3x camera lets you zoom up to a maximum of 10x digital zoom, which is not bad, but honestly, I expected a slightly better result. However, we must remember that it is a mid-range device, so in photography it looks very strong thanks to the telephoto, but in video it does not take advantage of it as much. If you record using the full HD resolution, you should know that it does allow you to switch between the three lenses, so you gain very good versatility, although sacrificing level of detail. However, it is curious that when recording in full HD, the maximum zoom is 20x, so it supports a longer range when recording in a lower resolution. It does look noisy when you're at maximum zoom though, so it's still not recommended to use it at the limit. So overall, I think the device in video disappoints a bit because of the high expectation it had generated for us for photography, but it is in accordance to its price. The focus doesn't seem to be that fast or snappy on this device, so it could get confused in some scenarios. It's not completely a big deal, but it definitely confirms to us that this is not a device that is 100% focused on video recording or with video recording as its specialty. The telephoto camera is also going to have a good focus. Fortunately, the subject doesn't need to be that far away, so it's still a good quality focus that could even serve you well for recording a sort of macro scene, as it looks at how detailed the subject can be. So I really like the telephoto camera for recording close objects. Fortunately, it also integrates a fast camera mode with stabilization and in 4K, although again at a bit low bit rate. So at times you might see a slightly pixelated result. The speed can be from 4x useful for recording movements of people and can reach up to 32x, which honestly falls very short if you want to record a time-lapse of landscapes. This is another aspect that for several generations I have been insisting that Motorola should improve, but they have not yet updated it. The slow motion can be in full HD at 120 frames per second. A good quality slow motion, basic, but for the price range it delivers well with a good level of detail and slow enough. But it can also be slower. It would be 240 frames per second, although it lowers the resolution to HD. For social networks, I think it's fine. For more professional content, it obviously falls very short in level of detail, but for the slowness it looks attractive. What a good shot I have! And the front camera records with a good quality. At 4K, it's a very good thing. Not all devices in the range have these capabilities, so the level of detail is going to look very good. In fact, it also has good stabilization, so even if you're walking or blogging, the result is very good. Only that, just like in photography, we may find colors a bit more saturated than usual. Also remember that it doesn't have fixed focus, so you couldn't zoom in on some object and keep it in focus. However, its backlight performance is remarkably good. Obviously not at the level of a high-end device, but it does a good job. In indoor scenarios, I find that saturation is multiplied for some strange reason. Also, the vibration caused by the longer exposure produces a bit of an odd result, so the front camera is recommended in very good light conditions. Notice that in my night test, I confirm what I'm telling you. The color saturates a lot when the light is a bit low and a bit more vibrations and noise appear. Fortunately, the stabilization is very good, but this same stabilization produces some strange vibrations when there is not so much light. It has exactly the same fast camera settings, so it can be useful, especially because it also maintains the stabilization in this mode. We will also find the possibility of making slow motion videos with the front camera, obviously in full HD, but it is something that not all devices allow, so it must be highlighted as a good point. In fact, it also integrates the dual recording mode, so you can show both the front camera and the rear camera at the same time. In this case, it allows you to rotate the cameras to show one of the two as the protagonist. It also allows you to move the floating frame to the position you want. In fact, it also lets you apply some zoom, but just as we saw a moment ago, you are limited because it cannot switch between the cameras. It only applies a slight zoom. Fortunately, it keeps autofocus enabled, so you might be able to show some objects. If you stop the recording and start it again, you can switch between the rear cameras. For example, in this case, we are now showing the main camera. Although it doesn't have such advanced stabilization, but if you use this camera, you're going to have a better zoom range, although it still doesn't switch to the telephoto camera. Fortunately, it does still maintain focus. If you stop and start again, you can use the telephoto camera with exactly the same behavior, although obviously a longer zoom range. And in this case, the recording with the dual camera will be in full HD. In fact, it also allows you a split screen mode in case you want the two scenes to be in the same size using the same space. Let's move on to talk about the software. In this case, it integrates Android 14 and Hello UI, which is Motorola's custom interface. In this case, it is curious because it has a 5-year policy of software updates with 5 years of security patches. In other words, it has improved over what Motorola offered in years past, even at the high end. So it might sound a bit strange for anyone who has purchased a device from this brand in years past, which was surely more expensive but is going to receive fewer updates than this model. However, it is very positive news for those who are interested in acquiring this device, as it will receive multiple software updates, which by the way can be installed in the background. That is, you can continue using your cell phone without any problem while the update is being installed. You do not need to stop using it like most devices. In the customization section, we find the traditional Android devices. In this case, it simply comes with a special typography made by Motorola that makes it look a little different from traditional Android. Of course, you can select the color palette of the entire system. You can even completely paint the icons if you wanted to, although that's in beta. You could also change the shape of the home screen icons. And of course, adjust the size of all these elements, the grid layout, and some other elements. Notice that in the case of the control center, we are going to find two layout styles. One that is for the more advanced who already know what each of these symbols means, but also in the settings you can switch to the classic style, where we will have the ability to swipe twice to access all this quick settings section that is distributed on different pages. This might be a little bit clearer because you see the text and the label, but it might take you a lot of steps to find exactly the one you're looking for. So with the modern style, this is made quite easy, although even in the modern style you can edit, and note that when you edit you can see all these text labels if you wanted to. In fact, also without editing, you can click the show label button and presto, you have easy and very visual access to all the controls in the system. The lock screen offers us some level of customization. You can change some styles of the clock. You can even add some indicator widgets. Notice that you can change the typography of this clock along with the colors, and in the case of indicator widgets, there are some that are available, mostly related to the weather or also the battery of your headphones and similar things, but it doesn't have such advanced widgets from third-party applications. At the bottom are going to appear the notifications, and you can choose whether you want them to appear as a list, as a small capsule, or simply in round format that will later open as bubbles. And finally, you can configure the shortcuts available in the corners. And it also has a small always on mode for the screen, although Motorola calls it an interactive screen. You choose whether you want it to stay always on or you want it to only show up when you move the device or pick it up. But besides showing you the time and a bit of additional information, you could press and hold on some notification to see more actions. That would be the difference from always on display implemented from other manufacturers. However, in this case, Motorola does not offer us a greater customization for this cover. They also integrate the sidebar through which you can open some applications in this floating window format. In fact, an excellent news is that you can not only open one application at a time, but as you realize, in this case, I have 3 applications open in this format and the device still works very well, even 4 apps open at the same time, and note that YouTube also supports this format. So I can have 5 apps open, and if I combine it with split screen, I could have even more apps in this format. He notes that Instagram also supports this format, so Motorola's multitasking is much improved over what we saw in past generations. In fact, we could also drag from the sidebar to the top half or bottom half to be able to open an app in split screen, and note that it works perfectly well. In addition, we can obviously change the size setting for each of these apps, and they will remain linked in the recent apps list. In the sidebar, you can not only add app shortcuts, but also some tools like screen recording or quickly switch to the last app. You can even access contacts, so you can quickly call someone from this sidebar. The one-handed mode is activated by swiping down on the navigation button. Although remember that it only transports to the middle part the things that were on the top. So it is not as comfortable as it should be, because sometimes it can become complicated to reach some button that is at the other end, and with this gesture is still too far away. Although fortunately it's a compact device, but I still don't like the one-handed mode. The traditional Motorola gestures are still present to open the camera, or for example also to turn on the flashlight. These are gestures that are definitely part of the identity of this brand. In fact, you could also open the camera by double pressing the power button. You can also take screenshots by holding 3 fingers on the screen. Although this gesture is not so useful, because sometimes you can get to interact with an icon or some element of the screen, and instead of making a correct capture, comes out a capture a little strange. You can also double tap on the back of the phone to open any application you want. You can open some shortcut or specific applications, and the truth is that it will work correctly. You just have to get used a little bit to the area where you are going to give the 2 taps, but in general I can tell you that it does work correctly, and a lot of the features added by Motorola are inside their own Moto folder. In fact, there is a specific app called Moto where you can see each of these features I mentioned and some additional ones, but another interesting feature would be Moto Unplugged, that will help you disconnect from the digital world, take some time to relax and avoid notifications and distractions. Then you just log in and customize which apps you want to be authorized. You can even change the wallpaper and choose which things or people can interrupt you. You can set that you need a password to be able to log out, and note that you just need to assign the necessary permissions to be able to use it for the first time. Although I wish this was already configured, because more advanced users might feel a bit scared with so many configuration steps. But after all the configuration, you can enter this mode, choose how long you want this session to last, and that's it. No one will be bothering you, and you will not be allowed to be distracted by social networks or anything like that. Regarding artificial intelligence, this device comes with some added features. For starters, within the wallpaper selector, we are going to find the function to create with artificial intelligence. You could take a picture of your outfit and the device will synchronize it. For example, in this case, I will simply take a picture of this plant and observe how the device will intelligently extract the main colors and create a pattern to have a completely unique wallpaper. For people who care a lot about fashion, it might be appealing to have a wallpaper that matches their clothes. As you realize, this would be one of the proposals. Here is another one available, and as you see, all of them show a different pattern while keeping the same color. There is also the option called Magic Canvas. With this one, you have to write some description so that it generates a wallpaper style with different categories. For example, let's select minimalist, and I will choose a description that says a small potted cactus on top of a table. I can choose what proportion I want this background to be, and let's press generate image. Now just wait a little bit of time. Obviously it requires an internet connection to work. As you notice, there's our wallpaper that we can set, and it's a unique background, so it's a feature that can be useful and attractive. And it also integrates Gemini from Google. You can swipe from any of the bottom corners towards the center to enable this assistant. Just hit the try it now button and watch as it will immediately start loading. However, this is a technology that is available on all other Android devices, so it's not unique to this model. But in case you didn't know, it's an artificial intelligence with whom you can chat. It understands all the context, it understands all the previous questions, and it can follow your conversation. Let's talk about security because it integrates an optical fingerprint reader that is located inside the screen, supports up to 5 records. It is not as fast as ultrasonic readers or capacitive readers that are outside the screen, but the unlocking seems effective. It also has facial recognition, but we will not pay much attention to it because it is only in 2 dimensions. It also has extended unlock to stay unlocked in secure environments, all in conjunction with Google technologies. And you can also autofill passwords directly into some forms, and it's set up nicely because it prompts you for your fingerprint before filling in. You also have the secure folder where you're going to be able to put apps or files, all in a completely private environment that you can access with a special password that can be different from your lock screen. So, inside the secure folder, you can have protected access to applications because outside there is no way to lock applications as we see on other devices. We will also find an automatic lock option that detects when you leave your trusted places, so you can activate this lock, and you could even request a 2-step authentication in case you need much more security still. You could also unscramble the numbers in case you use a PIN when unlocking your phone, and it has several options to protect you. For example, you can activate a protection against online scams that could prevent you from falling into a phishing trap where they try to trick you to steal your password. It also includes an option called network protection that will help prevent you when you are connected to a Wi-Fi network that has a weak protocol. In fact, you can also select which applications will not be able to use the internet if you are on an unsecured Wi-Fi network. These are really attractive options. Within the application section, note that you can also clone some of these items to get 2 accounts of the same on the cell phone, although there are few that are compatible. And besides having Google Play Protect, note that it integrates a proprietary antivirus technology developed by Motorola with ThinkShield technology that already has very good prestige in the industry, and note that after scanning it can give you some suggestions. It can alert you of malware, or it can even alert you of settings in case you have some options enabled that can give you some vulnerability against attacks. It also integrates a feature called Family Space that will help you to lend the phone to children or other family members, but not only to lend your phone, but from this same application you can manage the devices of your entire family, see their locations, and all completely free without having to pay any subscription or anything like that. So you can manage your entire family from here if they have Motorola phones, or if you are going to lend them your phone, you can create spaces for them. For example, we can create a space for kid 1 and we will give him permission to use the calculator only. You can configure some of the customization and whether or not you want to ask for a password, as well as assign a timer, so you can create several spaces for different children, and once you start you have to give the permissions. This is something that I'm telling you should already come configured so that not so advanced users don't feel so intimidated, but once you have everything activated, you can log in and notice that you will activate this special mode. You can choose how long you want the session to last, and that's it. The child can't leave and can't do anything other than what you've authorized. So it is definitely a useful option also to keep the device safe if you lend your cell phone to minors. And if you happen to lose your phone, fortunately you have the option to find My Phone, although this specifically with the Google network, as Motorola does not have its own development. The battery of this device is considerably small. This is another sacrifice in exchange for having a device this compact and light and comfortable in the hand. Its capacity is 4,310 mAh. Definitely in capacity it is much smaller than the vast majority of devices competing with it, and in my test it did indeed perform poorly. It slightly exceeded 3 hours in my foreground rain test, which is about an hour less than average, and in my background test it got a little closer to 4 hours, which tells me that it more or less tries to manage the apps that are running in the background well, but it's nothing spectacular. Definitely the battery, if you can get to make you suffer, you'll have to carry the charger everywhere. Fortunately, it's a relatively compact charger, comes included in the box, and charge very fast. In fact, in 15 minutes came up to 44% in the test we did. In 30 minutes came up to 74%, and the full charge finished in 46 minutes, this from 0 to 100, although it is not as advisable to do this type of load to not deteriorate both the battery. It is a 68 watts charger, but you should know that only in the initial stage it uses 68 watts, quickly drops to a much lower power to try to take care of the battery. I imagine on the screen you are seeing more or less the graph of how the power of this charger was behaving. However, although it does not charge all the time in 68 watts, and you realize that it charges quite fast, and that is definitely a point that somehow helps us to forgive that the battery does not last so long. But something that is surprising is that it integrates wireless charging, which can give you enough comfort. So for example, in your office you can have a wireless charging base to compensate for the fact that the battery is not very large. In fact, in this price range, I think there are no devices that offer this feature. However, through the settings, if we will find intelligent charging mechanisms that help us to more or less learn your routine, and in case you leave it plugged in all night, the phone charges much slower, although it has no charging blocking tools. Let's go now to the connectivity issue. Fortunately, comes well equipped with support for 5G networks, so you have good download speeds, but does not have a mode with which you can choose which applications, if you can use your mobile data to access the internet, and which applications must do so only by Wi-Fi is an option that most smartphones today include, but Motorola still does not. But back to talking about positive things, if it brings support for eSIM, then if you usually go, a lot of travel will be a tool that you will take advantage of a lot to add data plans simply with QR codes instead of buying a physical SIM card. And since this phone supports eSIM, let me tell you about Aerolog, which is a service that offers you an eSIM in case you go to travel. Can be very comfortable. Just hire it before traveling and you will get a QR code to your email or also from the same internet application. In the Aerolog application, you can have available this QR code that later you will install on your cell phone with eSIM. Just make sure you do not activate the eSIM before you are already traveling. Just install it and leave it ready so that once you are in the country you want to travel, you activate this eSIM and ready, you will be able to enjoy the service as you have hired it. For example, let's say you want to go to Europe, you can see that they offer various plans. At the time of recording this video, they would offer you a gigabyte for 7 days at $5. Obviously, there are also plans of 30 days with greater capacities or even longer duration of time. Everything will depend on you as a user. So in the description, I leave you the link so you can go to acquire your eSIM with Aerolog personally. I tried it when I went to Berlin and it worked perfectly well. This is one of the advantages of having a device with eSIM. And in addition to supporting eSIM, we are going to find support for Wi-Fi 6 with very good download speed. We are also going to find Bluetooth 5.4, which is a recent level of connectivity with good stability, good range. We also find NFC to make mobile payments, although it does not bring FM radio, which is something usual in the range, but you should know. And with respect to the screen projection, in this case, we will find two options. You can project in simple mirror mode, or also accounts with a function called Smart Connect, which is a kind of desktop mode with which you could project the screen in a windowed format, or specifically opening a player to view content on a larger screen is a tool that can be useful and is definitely also a plus by Motorola to give users more ways to use your device. In this case, only projects wirelessly and does not through cable, although for Android Auto, if you can connect both ways. And finally, in this case, with respect to the sensors, we will find a positive experience. Proximity sensor is completely physical and also integrates other sensors such as geomagnetic field or gyroscope. Regarding the ecosystem, I have already told you other times, Motorola is very dependent on Google, so it does not have such a broad ecosystem in terms of own development. Is true, there are Motobots, there is a Motowatch, and is somehow compatible with Lenovo laptops, also with Lenovo tablets, but there is not something specifically designed for everything to work harmoniously with each other. We'll use Google technologies such as Quick Share or Google Fast Pair, although Motorola does have an application that you can install on your computer even if it is not from Motorola, and the interaction is very good. I have tested it and allows you to send and receive files quickly, even share the clipboard, and many advanced features that make the ecosystem become something attractive even without having a computer of the same brand. The truth, this is an aspect that I liked a lot from Motorola, but if I would not be so dependent on Google, in fact, as soon as you turn on the phone and see the applications that are installed, you realize that many applications are from Google. In cloud storage, you depend on Google Drive and Google Photos. In home control, you rely on Google Home. The only app store is Google Play Store. And all this somehow gives us to understand that they definitely depend too much on this brand. Let's talk about the performance as we look at the application opening test. This device integrates the MediaTek Dimensity 7300 processor. It is not an ultra-powerful processor, but I think in the price range it can manage to compete well. It has 8 GB of RAM that extends to an additional 8 GB through virtual RAM with artificial intelligence supposedly. At one point we tested it, it took more or less 3.1 seconds to open each application. Remember that this is only an approximate benchmark. It does not seem to be something exaggeratedly fast, but I think that for a number of users is a more than good performance. In fact, the device has a function that supposedly through artificial intelligence is able to detect how you use your phone and learn to know which applications to keep in cache and open them faster the next time. Note that navigation within applications works well, and in this case, it seems that the 8 GB of RAM included are perfectly well managed. Notice that we have not seen any application restarts, which with this RAM capacity could be witnessed by having 16 applications open at the same time. So the device, I think, performs well. Overall, it looks like we're not going to see reboots, we're not going to see freezes, and even as I'm telling you, we're also going to see good navigation when we're inside the apps. Although I must say that at this moment I have the feeling that the device has increased its temperature slightly, but usually when I do these tests, I do not usually perceive as much heating as I am perceiving at this time. It's not annoying, but it does feel like I'm playing games when in fact we're still only testing apps. In this case, the camera app might have a bit more lag when displaying it like Snapchat, but note that the rest of the apps have performed well enough. In the performance section is where you can enable the smart home option that will learn how you use your apps. And also here we are going to find the function to extend memory. In this case, through artificial intelligence, it will also assign the additional capacity that it will offer you. Or you can manually add another 8 virtual gigabytes. Remember that they will wear out your internal storage and do not have the same speed as RAM. So personally, I would turn this option off, but that's how it comes by default. Notice that it comes with 256 gigabytes of storage, which is very good because you have very good space to store everything you want. Motorola doesn't share the figure or the specific version of this storage, but running this speed test, we realized that it has a very good read speed. The write speed is obviously slower, but overall I think they make us conclude that it does have a fast version of storage unlike other devices in the range. Finally, let's test how long it takes to export. As usual, clips recorded with this device in 4K with a total duration of 1 minute joining one after the other. Let's wait and I'll tell you the total time. And that's it. It took about 45 seconds. I think that's not bad at all considering the range that it's in and that we're exporting in 4K, although of course it's not going to be the most powerful thing in the range, but as I told you a moment ago, for a good amount of users, it's more than enough power. Regarding games, note that Motorola adds a specific application where you can browse games that you can run without the need to download them to save storage, or you can browse the games you already have installed. Here you can also open your gameplays to be able to view all the content you have recorded, and we are also going to be able to access the settings section. Here we can configure how you want the additional tools to appear when playing. Also, if you want the text labels to appear below the icons and if you want the tools to be hidden in the screenshots. Also note that it allows you to configure the screen recording to choose if you want your front camera to look small or large, if you want the screen recording to be in full HD or HD only, and even if you want the frames per second to go dynamically or up to 60 frames per second. You could also set some time limit or some size limit and of course show touches or not. In this case, you can also select whether or not you want it to show you a summary of the additional tools it brings for playing, and also if you want the applications to run in a floating window when you are playing. You can also block notifications and block calls or add exceptions or allow repeated calls to select who can interrupt you while you are playing. You could also block additional actions, for example screenshots or gestures, by shaking the device to avoid unwanted actions while you are playing, and also the lock mode, which will simply disable additional gestures again to avoid any kind of interruption. You can also lock the automatic brightness and enhance the audio. You could also access the information of games you have uninstalled if you had recorded gameplays, and lastly, you can select whether or not you want your mobile data to be used while playing. Once you open a game, notice that this floating icon will appear to open the full tools panel. Here you can see CPU and RAM consumption, plus a frame per second count and processor temperature. You also have quick sliders to adjust volume and brightness and controls to lock tools that I mentioned a moment ago. Notice that it also has different performance profiles if you want to prioritize battery saving or device performance. There are also buttons on the side that would allow us to go back to our game manager or share this game, take screenshots, screen recordings, or finally edit the quick settings. Also note that in the Applications tab, we can open these applications in a floating mode, then it has good tools at the software level as well. In Call of Duty by default, we load very high quality graphics at a maximum rate. We can go up to an ultra rate, but it reduces the graphic quality, so it depends on what things you want to prioritize. In this first test, we played in very high graphics quality at a very high rate and noticed that it does support a good amount of filters, something that was previously uncommon in MediaTek processors. This shows us that MediaTek has been improving significantly, including several experimental functions. With this configuration, the device gave a very good performance. You are seeing it yourself. Even recording the screen behaved well, had excellent stability. Even the temperature did not exceed 40 degrees Celsius. With this, you realize that it will be a device that can give you a good response when playing. I think it competes quite well for the range, although I do not think it is the main exponent in games, but it defends itself well. Then we played with the ultra setting in the frame rate per second, and in this case it did manage to rise significantly. Its maximum peak was 93 frames per second and the average was 89. And again, we see good stability, you don't see such big fluctuations, it has good temperature control, and in fact in this price range, it's not that common to see this refresh rate compatible. So definitely that yes, it is going to be a good exponent in this aspect. We then played Legends, changing the setting to a medium level at 60 frames per second to put a test adjusted to its price. And again, as has already happened a lot in this game, in the initial stage it has too high a peak, then it's adjusting intelligently, so the average ended up being 95, but consider that the lowest peak was 55, so it maintained very good stability, again having excellent temperature control. So I think with this it confirms that MediaTek these days makes really good processors for gaming, depending on the range obviously, but this one specifically gives you good performance. In the case of SpongeBob, we left the resolution and quality at a medium level at 60 frames per second for testing. And in this case, you notice a lot more fluctuations in the graphics, but in the actual experience, it's not too noticeable as it stays between 60 and 50 generally. So we are really going to have again a positive experience when we are playing. What we did notice in this specific content is that when recording, the screen did lose a little more stability. So if your priority was to record gameplays or something similar of very heavy content, maybe you could get to notice some instability, but for this price I think its behavior is really good. Finally, Henshin Impact by default loads it in very low graphics quality. For testing, we turned it up to a low level at 60 frames per second, and with this setting it did well enough. Again, it was varying between 60 and 50 frames per second. It doesn't maintain a completely stable experience, but the low peaks are definitely not so low that they really affect your gaming experience. It's still not a 100% gaming focused device, as it doesn't offer that many additional tools, nor does it offer a massive cooling system or anything similar, but it controls its temperature well, it behaves well, so I definitely think it's a good device for gaming as well. As a conclusion, I was already anticipating it, and it is one of the best competitors, especially for integrating the telephoto camera, water resistance, a very good screen, and some other elements. However, it does have some important things to correct. Fortunately, some can be corrected through a software update, other things we may have to wait for future generations, but overall I think it is a very good proposal. For the moment, this has been all for this video. I hope you liked it. If you did, you know you can indicate it, and see you next time.